Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. Lines and links to my YouTube series where I actually walk you through all of the exercises in the program. This is a great beginner strength training guide for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that helps support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and injury-free. So once again, both of these guides are available together. I have them put together as a little bundle for you. You can just click on the link in the show notes or go over to www.stephanienatchek.com. Enter your email address just the one time, and both of these free guides will get sent to your inbox right away. I hope you enjoy these resources and find them helpful in supporting you and your running. And now let's get into today's episode. All right. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where this will hopefully, maybe, I'm not sure, be a little bit of a shorter episode where I am answering a specific question that I was asked recently that I thought would make a really great little episode here about your long run. And the question was, should you cap your long run at 3 hours as a slower runner? And as I, was reflecting on my answer to the question, of course, it's always a great big, it depends, and a great big, it depends on, a number of factors, which we're going to talk about today. And then ultimately figuring out what is the best fit for you based on, your own background and experience and, how your overall training plan is going. So, we're going to today explore the question of, should you cap your long run at 3 hours? And in particular, as a slower runner, should you be capping your long run at 3 hours? So to kind of get into it, why the 3 hour rule, maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't, but the 3 hour rule for long runs, it's been sort of part of running, I'll say lore for a very long time, quite a few decades, in that there was some research that was done, again, several decades ago, where they found that the benefits of the long run, so the physical adaptations, the things that happen in our body's cells, our body's systems, diminished, the improvements or the adaptations, the benefits diminished after this long run of greater than 3 hours. So there's kind of this peak, we get more and more and more benefit the longer long run we do. And then around 3 hours, that sort of plateaus or peters off. We don't get continued ongoing benefit by running longer and longer and longer and longer. The other trade-off here is that there is going to be significant recovery time that is required, right? The longer we are running, the more muscle damage we are encountering, the longer the recovery time we're going to require. And so there's also, of course, this school of thought that, the longer the long run, if we're doing a lot of big long runs that are quite a bit longer than 3 hours, what is that doing to our recovery time and our ability to then do, the rest of the weekly workouts that are there? So that's where this sort of 3 hour rule has sort of come from. And, a lot of people like to think of it as sort of a hard and fast rule that, doesn't matter how many miles they're covering during that time, but they're capping that long run at 3 hours. And as a running coach, I will say this is something that I have certainly used with a number of my clients, where I don't really care how many miles you cover, but we're going to run for about 3 hours for some of these long runs. The reason I like to do that sometimes is because it gets people out of their head about pace, gets us just focusing on, quality time on feet, gets us practicing fueling and hydration without running, I'll say sort of the risk of doing a long run that is significantly longer than 3 hours just because we're trying to cover a certain mileage. And sometimes mentally, I certainly find it nice to just say, okay, I have to go out for a certain amount of time rather than going out for a certain distance. You may agree, you may not agree. Either way, that's totally fine. So there's a few reasons why I have personally used kind of the 3 hour benchmark or the 3 hour cap in long runs for my clients. Now, the other, sort of piece to this is that you can have a cap on the length of time of the longest long run, or we want to think about our long run as part of our total weekly volume. So you also might have seen that, your long run shouldn't be a lot more or shouldn't be more at all. Some people will even say than 30% of your total weekly running volume. Now, depending on your running pace, that may be more difficult, more challenging. And it also depends on how much time you have to run throughout the week. For some people who maybe only have like an hour, an hour at the most to train Monday through Friday, but have a lot more time on the weekends, it can be really difficult to stick to that, 30% of total weekly volume or that 3 hour rule when you're doing marathon training. And that's just the reality of the situation. So I think that, these guidelines are beneficial. I think it's good to have some guidance and some structure to how we create a training program. But at the end of the day, we also have to be looking at the person in front of us, and we have to be thinking about their goals, their realities, their expectations, and be okay with making adjustments and not following those rules all the time if it doesn't work for someone. Now, if we have a runner who, their long run is a significant portion of their weekly mileage, maybe they only ran one or two other times that week. They were running for 30, 40 minutes, 2 other days that week. Now we have this long run, and this long run is, say, 10 miles. That might be like 50 or 60% of their total weekly volume is wrapped up in this single run. It's not ideal. Certainly we want to think about more running frequency, if at all possible, even if they are shorter runs, just so that we are, getting more opportunities to put in a higher volume versus it all being, kind of concentrated on that one single day. But I digress. It's not always so easy to do that. So, we have to sort of look at the overall picture here. But the other thing that I wanted to point out, just talking about where some of these numbers come from, how some of these numbers came to be, is we have to understand that this concept of, the length of time or the weekly volume or any of these running rules that we talk about are not always based in super rigorous science. And that's true of many, many things. And it's not because, people who do exercise physiology science or research these areas aren't doing a good job. It's just that it's very difficult to do research on some of these topics. And a lot of research is going to be done on, not on recreational runners. A lot of it's not done on female runners, and a lot of it isn't even done on slower runners either. So, for example, if we're talking about this 3 hour long run cap, a lot of the research that was done in this area and the reason that we have these numbers is that they're studying people who are running a marathon in significantly less than 3 hours. So of course, if the whole marathon isn't even going to take you 3 hours, then it would stand to reason that there probably isn't a benefit of doing a significantly longer long run than what the whole marathon is even going to take you. But if you're on the flip side of that and you're maybe, a 4, 5, 6 hour marathoner, it might be a little bit of a different story. And this is where we just don't have a lot of data. Now, the thing that we're balancing out here, the risk benefit analysis, is going to be the injury risk. How completely can we recover in between these workouts? And I'll sort of paint a picture for you, give you a scenario. Let's say you do your long run on a Saturday, and that long run takes you 4.5 hours. Very big, very long run. And you are so exhausted, so sore, so stiff that when it comes time for your speed session on Monday or maybe Tuesday, you can't do a quality speed session. Like, you just cannot hit those paces. You cannot complete those intervals. Your legs feel dead. Like, you are not adequately recovered from that long run to do a quality speed session 2 or 3 days later. Now, could we maybe adjust when you do your speed session to give you that recovery time? Absolutely. But also, you probably would benefit more, I would say, from just cutting back the duration of that long run, at least, some of the time, not doing such a big long run that it's just, absolutely killing you for days afterwards. Now, on the other hand, if you are, I'm going to start that again. Now, on the other hand, if you're doing a long run that's taking you a little bit longer than 3 hours, maybe you're doing like 3.5 hours for that long run, and you are having pretty quick turnaround recovery wise, you are easily able to get in, the speed sessions within a couple of days, and you're not feeling sore, you're not feeling tired, you're not feeling run down, everything's great, you're not getting injured, then there would be no real reason to back off on the duration of that long run just because of this, theoretical increase in injury risk or reduction in benefit that you might be achieving. Now, again, the difference between 3 and 3.5 hours is pretty minimal. It's just, going to be a few miles for most people. So I wouldn't be too in the weeds about that. It's not like there's some sort of something magical or, detrimental that happens to you right at that 3 hour mark. And we have to immediately stop running and not take another single step. Another scenario, kind of another picture that I want to paint for you, if you will, is thinking about the overall goal that you have for this race and what the rest of your week of training really looks like. Because if you're someone who's just building up their running volume for the first time, maybe you are training for your first marathon or one of your first marathons, that you are just starting to do this volume of training, like you're just putting in these miles for the first time. And maybe you're following a training plan that doesn't have a lot of speed work. Like all of your runs maybe are easy runs. When I'm creating, I'll say sort of beginner or intro to marathon types of plans, there may not be any speed work at all for some runners who are doing this for the first time and just really, really focusing on improving their endurance and increasing their time on feet. In that case, because we don't have these like speed sessions and these like quality workouts that we're trying to get in, all the running is easy running. In that case, then there may be an opportunity to do a little bit of a longer long run, especially as someone who's, not a particularly fast runner, because again, it's just adding to that total volume that person is able to run. However, I do actually prefer having, I'll say, a midweek longer run. So rather than having all of the volume be kind of concentrated on that one weekend day and doing these big long runs that one day a week, spacing it out is something that I think is really valuable. And so that might look like picking one other day of the week. Midweek is great because then, of course, you've got some recovery time in between to do a little bit of a longer run on a weekday. That's not always possible. That's not always feasible. And I totally understand that. But if we can fit that in, then I really like to have, a few opportunities to do those longer distances. Again, you're getting the physiological benefits. You're getting those adaptations that are happening in your body and your muscle cells. The second thing is that, you're having another opportunity to practice your hydration, practice your fueling, practice your gear, all the things, because in a, 12-week marathon training program, you don't have that many opportunities to try all this stuff out. Like once you start getting into those, say, 2 to 3 hour long runs where you're really putting your fueling and hydration and everything to the test, there's not that many of those. And so to have a second longer run throughout the week, maybe that's going to be a maximum of like 90 minutes. Then you have another opportunity to do that, which I think is really great. So the, couple considerations, if we're thinking about, for you as an individual, should you do a long run that is longer than 3 hours? Things that I would think about are going to be, what is your goal for this race? Is your goal to finish? Is your goal to run in a certain time frame? Is this your first marathon, or do you have a ton of marathon experience and all of this fitness and sort of this background base of running that you've been, doing for a long time? How injury prone are you? Like, are you someone who does struggle a lot with getting injured, especially at higher volumes, and maybe a lower volume is going to keep you healthier getting to that race? What is your capacity and ability to recover? Are you someone who recovers relatively quickly from your workouts and you don't have a hard time bouncing back and you can get in those quality workout sessions during the week without a struggle? Or are you someone who really finds that, those long runs kind of wreck you and you do need a little bit more downtime before you can do a speed session? And what are your fueling and hydration practices? What's your sleep like? What's the other load of stress in your life looking like these days? The nice thing is that fueling and hydration can be fixed. If you know that fueling and hydration is a problem for you, those are things that absolutely can be rectified as part of your overall training plan. Sleep, hopefully it can be fixed. It's easier said than done sometimes. Speaking as someone who has two little babies here at home, and then, looking at what are the adaptations or what are the things that I'm striving to do with this long run? Like, am I right now really trying to get those physiological benefits? Or is this just mental? Is it just that I have a little bit of anxiety about being able to run for this long? And for me, I just want to know and be confident that I can run for this length of time. Because that's an important factor too. A lot of new marathoners, and I'll say, slower marathoners, really are concerned that they've never run that distance in training. The thing is, few people do. As a marathon, part of the challenge of the marathon is that you have not run a marathon in marathon training, and you have to just have a little bit of trust in your fitness and trust in the process that you're going to be able to do it and cover the distance on the day of the race. So just know that if part of the sort of anxiety or part of the rush for you to do longer sessions is the fact that you just want to know mentally that you can do it. Few people really get that opportunity, but it does come with more race experience. You'll build that confidence, and you'll know that you're able to do it. So at the end of the day, we want to balance out our goals. We want to balance out our risk of injury, how quickly and effectively we can recover, what the rest of our week's training is looking like. And ultimately, we need to try different things and find what works for us. And I know that we say this about everything in running. I say it all the time with nutrition. We talk about it with hydration. We talk about it with training practices, talk about it with so many things, is that you are a unique individual and you sometimes need to, take all of this advice, get all this information with a little bit of a grain of salt, and then ultimately try different strategies and figure out what you like best. We know that generally speaking, the more we run, the better our race day performance. So overall, running more miles is considered a good thing when we're talking about distance running. The higher the training volume, the better we can perform on race day. However, that doesn't mean that we are doing as many miles as we possibly can with no structure, no rhyme or reason, no consistency, no gradual build towards that race day, right? We still want to have a plan and a program that we're following that takes us through that lead up. And we always have to think about, what's my risk of injury? Am I someone who does tend to get injured more often? And so maybe running a lower volume, but getting to that race healthy is ultimately going to benefit my race day performance versus always showing up to the race with, with nagging injuries and with things that still aren't feeling 100%. So those are all other considerations. I think that this is also, just a really good kind of opportunity and, of course, a shameless plug for hiring a coach and working with someone who can help answer these questions for you as a unique individual. If your coach has sort of I'll say, very hard and fast way that everyone trains the same, everyone does the same thing, everyone does the same types of workouts, that's great if you only work with one type of runner and they all have similar goals. But if you work with different types of runners who have different experiences or training for different distances, are, at different, front of the pack, back of the pack, middle of the pack, etc., then we really do need to remember that and take that into consideration when we're building out these training programs. So if you are listening to this as a runner who has been feeling, very confused, you may be looking up some training plans online, you are downloading lots of training plans and looking at them and you're not really sure. This one says this, that one says that, this one's got, distances, maybe it says to do 18, 20, 22 miles in training. This other one is based on time. Should I be running on time or mileage? Or, you're just seeing so many different things out there, so many different options. Then I do think there's tremendous value in sitting down with someone, talking to a coach to figure out what is the best way forward for you. Nothing will ever compete with your own experience as a runner. But if you are continually frustrated and disappointed with your race day performances and experiences because you are not, I'll say, properly trained or properly prepared for what you're doing, then it can, unfortunately lead a lot of people to end up leaving the sport of running because they're just not getting that joy out of it that you deserve and that you should be. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. As I said, I tried to keep it short and sweet, about capping your long run at 3 hours, whether you should, whether you shouldn't. I think it's one of those big gray areas, just like everything else is with running, to say that I think it's a good general rule of thumb, a good sort of overall guideline, based on some science, some research. However, that's not going to be a hard and fast rule that necessarily works for everyone all the time. So we want to understand these guidelines. We want to appreciate them for what they are, but ultimately we also want to look at ourselves as unique individuals and figure out what's going to work for us. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know if you enjoyed this little kind of shorter snippet episode where I'm just answering like one specific question at a time. You can definitely let me know on social media. You can find me at Steph the Runner's Dietitian. You can send me an email, info@stephanienatchuk.com. We will see you back here next week. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.